Good morning, and welcome to the fifth week of our continuation online of Introduction to the Humanities. We've had an opportunity over the course of the past several weeks to reflect pretty profoundly on the ways in which the pandemic calls into question our way of life. And in doing that, asks us to think again about the question with which we began, namely the question of what it means to be human. And so this week we're going to begin trying to tie the course back together. We are going, among other things, to focus back directly on that question of what it means to be human. And I'm going to give you some of the resources that you need in order to prepare your final reflection. So this will be the last week in which I introduce new material which is in some significant and meaningful sense required for the class. And then the rest of the time you will have available to you to work on the final assignment. Although next week I probably will also upload a video and put up a discussion board, which will be optional. If you participate in that, it would simply replace your highest grade. So last week in particular, as we reflected on the question of the pandemic and work, we found ourselves returning to that question of what it means to be human. And the debate around the pandemic, the debate around staying closed or reopening, the debate around returning to normal or moving towards something new, put sharp focus on what scholars call the secular project or modernity, which is at its core the idea that being human is fundamentally about what we accomplish, what we do in this world. The term secular, although it's often understood to mean or used to mean non-religious or even anti-religious, comes from the Latin saeculum, which is the world. And so secularity fundamentally is a focus on this world. And we had a chance last week to look at two different variants of this secular worldview. The capitalist variant, represented by what Max Weber called the Protestant ethic, the idea that our value as a human being is based fundamentally on the efficiency of our self-instrumentalization, the extent to which we are productive, particularly productive for capital, particularly productive for the accumulation of capital. And as people have questioned whether or not we need this level of focus on work over the course of the past several months, and particularly since the quarantine, people are finding that a lot of the things they did at the office aren't actually necessary, even to make those enterprises run. There have been a number of people who have doubled down on that Protestant ethic, that ethic of maximum productivity, that ethic of maximum instrumentalization of humanity. We've heard a number of public figures come out and say there are more important things than life, and being productive is actually the most important thing, and quite willing, therefore, to allow the old, the infirm, the disabled, the marginalized to die in the interest of reopening. We also looked at a different, much more humanistic variant of the secular ideal, what we saw in Marx. And there the idea is not sheer productivity, it is not certainly instrumentalization, it is the idea that human beings are defined by our creativity. That unlike other animals, which in a certain sense merely produce copies of themselves, we bring into being new forms of organization. We create new technologies, we create works of art, we build complex relationships with each other, we build complex systems of meaning, and that the unfolding of that potential, the development of that potential, the cultivation of that potential in this world, in our lives, is in fact what it means to be human, but that capital stands in the way, that capitalism as a system requires us to sell our labor power in order to survive, and turns what is in fact a participation in the creative power of the universe into something which is a source of exploitation and a source of pain. But Marx still does have that focus on interworldly activity. So this week we're going to turn back and look at some pre-modern alternatives, and I'm going to ask you to take a look at some of the readings that we would have examined together in class, which suggest some very different perspectives. So I have pulled into the folder for this week the Keres origin story, which is a story about the origin of the world told from the perspective of the Keres people at Acoma, which is a pueblo in the southwestern United States. And it's an approach that in some ways is also interworldly, but that stresses human participation in the creative process, understood more as natural cycles. And I'll try to point out some particular sections of that for you to focus on. I have also posted one of the Buddhist sutras. It is a sutra that many Buddhists believe to reflect the earliest stages of Buddhist teaching, whether or not it was officially and authentically taught by Gautama Siddhartha himself, we don't know. But it does represent a fundamental base stratum, and the Sanskrit name or the Pali name means the turning of the wheel of the law, or the beginning of the turning of the wheel of the law. And this sutra suggests an utterly different perspective on what it means to be human. It basically says that life is suffering, that suffering comes about from our attachment to things that are always impermanent and always unsatisfying, and that we can overcome suffering by overcoming our attachment to things, by overcoming specifically the idea that things have inherent existence. And when we recognize that things are all interdependent, that everything is impermanent, temporary, and passing, that we can achieve a state of enlightenment. This is a very different understanding of what it means to be human. And it is if the first reading, the Keres reading, is a representative of what we might call indigenous ways of being human, the Buddhist reading is a representative of what I would call the way of wisdom, the idea that in order to achieve the meaning and purpose of human life, what we need most to do is to understand the nature of reality correctly, that a correct reading of reality is the key to what it means to be human. I also have uploaded it's actually not a selection, it's the whole text, it's a very short text, the Da Jue, the Great Learning. It's an important text in the Confucian tradition in China, which puts forward, again, another way of being human. And it is a way that is focused, again, in some ways on this world, but it is focusing not so much on creativity as it is on self-cultivation, on the cultivation of human virtue, and the cultivation of human excellence. And it makes an argument about how we achieve that. And the idea is that if you want to have a just society, you need to start with yourself. And that, for Confucius, since he was an advisor to kings and rulers, applies to kings and rulers as well. So they need to begin by governing their families correctly, and in order to begin governing their families correctly, they have to become excellent human beings. And he explores in some depth exactly what that means. And then finally, I have included a selection from the book of Leviticus. It's one of the books of the Torah. specifically Leviticus 25, which has some legal texts. The entire body of Leviticus is a set of ancient Jewish legal texts that are focused above all on preventing the development of inequality. At the center of the Jewish tradition is the idea that being human above all means being just, that we meet God and we realize our own latent potential in the just act. And I'd like you to read through that, and it may be a little bit difficult to meander through, but it will point to a set of laws which is ultimately designed to prevent exploitation. Now, whether or not those laws were ever actually enforced is at best a disputed question, but as later Judaism developed, it developed by taking examples of these ancient, perhaps idealized laws and saying, what does it mean in the present period? One of the points, in a certain sense, the summary point of the selection is a phrase where we're asked not to drive a hard bargain with our neighbors. And of course, capitalism is all about driving hard bargains. And so it is a very different ethos. Again, in some ways interworldly, right? Of all of these texts, the only one which in a certain sense says that the world is at some level not the locus of meaning, but merely a locus of suffering is the Buddhist tradition. Interworldly, but not focused primarily on accomplishment and achievement, but in this case on the just act, on ethical conduct. So I'm going to ask you to work your way through those, and if it takes more than 1 week, that's fine. The final assignment then for the course will be either a paper which explores the question of what it means to be human, and I will ask you very, very, very specifically to reflect on how the pandemic may have altered or may not have altered your thinking on that question, or may perhaps it intensified convictions that you already held. But also to bring that into dialogue with at least 2 of the texts that we have studied this semester. Probably a couple of these texts from the last few weeks, Marx, Weber, some of the articles on the pandemic and political economy, the Buddhist Sutra, the Keras origin story, the Dajue, Leviticus 25, to take a look at these texts and bring your own thoughts into dialogue with them. What do these texts contribute to your understanding? If you disagree with them, explain why, okay? The other option will be a creative work of some kind. So it could be a drawing, a painting, a musical composition, a musical performance that brings together the work of others in a way that you think makes a statement about what it means to be human. It could be an architectural model. It could be a short video. It could even be a short talking heads video like this, if that's your preferred medium. I find it a rather challenging medium, so I would probably not choose that myself. But if it's something you do, and I know a lot of people do it to great effect, then that's fine. But it could also be a video of a short performance, a skit. It could be a short film, kind of a microfilm. And then accompany that just with a short statement, no longer than a page, explaining what you are trying to say and how. And if you choose the creative route, I'll expect that you show some understanding of the formal elements and principles of that particular artistic modality. I'm not going to be grading you primarily on your technical effectiveness, although I would suggest choosing a medium that you feel like you have some interest in or comfort in. but you're not expected to show the skill that you would show even in a beginning drawing class or painting class or composition class or something like that. So that would be the final assignment. And then the purpose of the discussion board this week is mostly to give you an opportunity to begin to try out your ideas. So again, begin responding to those questions and try to get a handle on really on what you do think it means to be human. And then next week, I'm going to do, again, as an optional piece for you to access as you will, a kind of condensed version of what I'd hope for the conclusion of the course, which is a look at how you act on the question of what you believe it means to be human, what you want to do with your own life. So we'll talk a little bit about strategy and operations and tactics and defining your comparative advantage, and kind of circle back to that second piece of where we began the course. And there'll be a discussion board there as well, which will be optional. So I thank you all very much. I may post some additional videos, and we'll probably post at least some PowerPoints that give you kind of a schematic and tightly organized approach to the question of what it means to be human, so you can kind of situate yourself in that context. Again, I do hope that you are all safe and well. Please let me know if there's anything that I can do for you. It is my hope that everybody successfully completes this course. I do want to let you know that the district has decided that if you can't complete and choose to withdraw instead, that you will get a refund, that you, although you would get a W, that W will not be counted against you in your maximum of 6. And they're working pretty hard to make sure that there are no financial aid penalties. I've been in conversation with the district financial aid office to try to clarify some of that, and they really do want to make sure that as few people as possible are hurt by this. So I hope you will finish, and I will be taking an approach to evaluation which takes into account the sudden change in the modality of the course. I will probably be dropping your lowest grade. You should have seen as well the notes that some of the assignments that we dropped because of the change in modality, but that some of you chose to do anyway, can substitute for lower grades or give you some very modest extra credit. So I'm trying to do as many different things as I can to help get you through, and also hopefully to ensure that this has been a meaningful experience for you. So thank you very much, and do let me know if there is anything at all that you need. Thank you.